Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to the next episode of the Archival Discourses. Tonight, we'll be tackling the War on Terror. I'm lucky to be rejoined for this episode by AI Shire Tory. How are you, AI?
I'm great, Hitman. Thank you for having me back on. And I've been ever since you told me last week what the subject would be. I was actually quite looking forward to it. There's a lot of interesting and very relevant techniques that are used that we will discover in this that contemporary contemporaries of in power today use. And I think this will be quite a good in-depth analysis on on both sides on this question on the war of terrorism.
Thank you, and also rejoined by Yizz the Eunuch. How are you, Yizz?
Hello, well, glad to be back. I'm doing
Thank you.
just fine. Thank you for asking.
No problem. So we're dealing with the war on terror. Now, what inspired me to tackle this topic? Well, recently we've had the 23rd anniversary of 9/11, and obviously I think, not sure about years, but certainly me and AI being, well, I'm a younger millennial, and I think AI, you're a younger millennial as well, if I'm not mistaken.
I mean, I do remember 9/11 vividly. I know it was shocking, my young demeanor and voice and everything. I'm actually probably a bit older than some might realize, but I do remember it vaguely. I probably didn't understand fully at the time the implications of it until much later on, but I do remember it vaguely. Um,
Mm, okay.
and
Well,
and I probably more because of the family sort of settings that I was in, being military, and so it did have a longer term impact um, down the road. But yeah, I do remember it vaguely, and how much it changed. I mean, the strange thing, Hitman, is before 9/11, I remember going on a commercial flight, and I was able to look down the aisle and look out towards the cockpit, and the door to the crew that was wide open. You could look out the front of the plane, and then that obviously you don't have that now for obvious reasons. So little things like that I do remember.
I also
oh no,
remember the
thank you.
before time as well when stupid TVA don't crawl up your hoop every time you want to go to the airport. It's things are a lot different, and I have a lot to say culturally about what things were like before, what things were like during the height of the war on terror, but I don't really know exactly what you want me to talk about, so I'll just wait until I get a good lead point before I start reminiscing or sharing things.
Well, I mainly just wanted to reflect back on it and its long-term impact, and also how I just think the whole thing was partially a kind of a trick, really, to ultimately, I think it was very conceited, and ultimately, what I think they wanted to do was legislate a lot of measures from a moral
Mhm.
panic to further solidify the control of what we call the regime, as it were.
Yeah, I think you can draw direct parallels from the regime. It doesn't really matter Democrat or Republican, Tory or Labor. What matters is the elements of control and the never-ending power creep of whatever you want to call it, socialism, authoritarianism, whatever you want to call it. When you look at the war on terror and then you look at what was done to us 4 years ago under the name of COVID protection, a lot of patterns emerge of creep, control, invasive. What's the right word? Invasive security measures, that kind of thing. And I think that this is the path that we are on societally, which is the people with power more and more want us to be lab rats or slaves on a plantation. They do not like um, unpredictable things, and freedom is unpredictable. They want line go up forever, and they want to minimize anything that is unpredictable or uncontrollable. And so, to minimize randomness and to optimize control, you have to have never-ending authoritarian, invasive civic structures. And I think that's what we have seen both in COVID and 20 years before during the War on Terror in the heyday of that.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because looking back at it, one thing I remember was the amount of, and even though I wasn't in America, and it was a distant in that respect, but because it was such a 9/11 and events leading up to afterwards was such a important for the time, given its scale, the death toll and everything that went with it. There was a lot of fear in the West, particularly in the Anglosphere. And I imagine in America, I mean, obviously there was a lot of fear, possibly even levels of paranoia. And one of the things that, and this is when we've been watching the Adam Curtis, other, like looking at the psychology, the rise of the pseudoscientists like Freud and his underlings, is that there's this mentality that that rejects the old world thinking of not becoming slave to your emotions and slave to fear. And what's quite sad is a lot of people did become slaves to fear and slaves to these sorts of emotions, which I mean, I think Curtis would describe as illogical and erratic in that regard. And it allowed an elite who had no enemy. And this is the thing that's quite interesting, is as we'll get onto with the clips we're going to see, between the time between the fall of the Soviet Union and the communist Eastern Bloc and 9/11, the West normally didn't have like a villain. It was like Batman without any sort of Joker or Penguin or someone as a rival. And so what one thing that I always think about is what makes it worse is it because of 9/11 and the war on terror, it brought new lease of life to a regime which was, for all intents and purposes, like a paper tiger.
No, I think there was certainly a level of stability there, and it's interesting because obviously you've got the concept of the end of history coined by Francis Fukuyama in the early 90s, and it very much for the time of the 90s did feel like the end of history, but then soon as you have the war on terror, the end of history is over. And I think it's interesting that people have talked about, we've lived in the end of history since the 90s until the war in Ukraine, but no, I would say the war on terror really repudiated the idea of the end of history more than anything else. So,
and it's worth bringing up here the phrase coined by academic agent, the Boomer Truth Regime. In the Boomer Truth Regime, the thing you have to realize is that's basically the same name for what we in the Go Free method in the Go Free community. It's what we call the anti-white or the anti-Western narrative. It replaced all morality based on God or anything metaphysical with liberalism or the West or capitalism or whatever is the good, and everything that isn't that is the bad. And look, we externalized the bad. We beat the commies in Russia. We beat Hitler and the Nat-Sox. We beat Mussolini and the fascism. We beat monarchical tyranny in feudal Japan, right? Like, so all those things were externalized. Look, we are the heroes. We beat the bad guys. Here's the narrative. We have become God. We are the good force now. We don't need metaphysics anymore. And that doesn't last, though, because it's been almost 100 years, right? Hitler's gone. Fascism's gone, whatever you want to say, right? Like Mussolini and all that stuff is gone. That shadow gets fainter and fainter, but the regime needs to externalize the negative force, the Satan of the narrative. So that's why I think that they do the things that AI was just talking about. They need that externalized symbol of evil to continue to falsely lionize the champion of good in the West. That is a critical part of the Boomer Truth Regime or the anti-white narrative. And so I would imagine things like 9/11, things like Putin in Russia, there's always going to be a need for, oh, look, there's a new Satan for our narrative. We have to optimize this to keep the lie going. What do you think about that? Do you think I'm right?
No, I completely agree with you. This is something AI has pointed out a lot. They're always trying to find the ersatz Hitler, whether it's so well, as
Oh,
a
that's a
good
good phrase.
example.
Ersatz Hitler. That's good. Very good.
Yeah, I mean, one example which Radlib likes to bring up is really the first one is probably Manuel Noriega in Panama, who was deposed by Bush Senior, and
Oh
then of
yeah,
course
yeah.
yeah, and then you've
Yeah,
got
and Milosevic in Serbia and Saddam in Iraq. I mean, I remember even Saddam. I remember with the 2003 invasion. I think it was the Mail was directly calling him like Hitler of the Middle East or something like that. They did, like directly referred to him as yeah. They weren't even sort of trying to hide it at that point.
no, and it's also interesting is these people were positively frothing at the mouth to destroy these ersatz Hitlers, and what's even more intriguing is these same people are also frothing at the mouth when a certain tribe in the Middle East does some violent action, so to speak.
Yeah.
Well, from this point, what I wanted to do is I've got some Twitter posts lined up, which I wanted us to go through and take a look at. So I'm just going to pull those up. Yeah, so on actual 9/11, the OGC actually did put out a post, so which I'm just going to read this. So, 23 years ago today, tragedy shook our entire nation to its very core. Facing unprecedented danger and for many certain death, New York City's bravest answered the call. Say we honour the memory of the fallen, 2,977 civilians, 13 paramedics, 60 police officers, and 343 firefighters. The Old Glory Club offers our sincere condolences to those still affected by this heartless act of terrorism, and we honour those who lost their lives and those that gave theirs. Thank you, and God bless the American people. And then you've got a few images here. Yeah, very somber stuff. And out of interest, have you ever been to Ground Zero, Yizz? Yes.
Oh, forgive me. I was muted. Forgive me. No, I have not. I have not been there.
Oh no, just wondered.
I don't like New York City. I've driven through it one time, and it was absolutely miserable experience, and I never want to go back. I do not like big cities in general, and I especially did not enjoy New York the one time I went, and that was before 9/11.
Okay. And yeah, so as much as what we've said and about how awful that this tragedy's been exploited, as I think we do need to do as the OGC have done. We've got to reflect back and realise that a lot of innocent people lost their lives that day, and it was tragic. And I hope nothing ever like this ever happens again. So
yeah,
I mean, this. I think what it does demonstrate is like it's the barbarity of it, and I know this is where I come back onto like the the racial and civilizational part of it. I mean, these people, and I've lived in the Middle East. These people are barbarians. These people are barbarians. That is just. I'm sorry, but that's just it. They cannot be allowed in Europe. They cannot be allowed in the West.
well, while that is true, do you actually think that a bunch of idiot Saudi terrorists are the ones that did this? Because I don't. I don't think that's true. I don't believe the official narrative at all.
Well, yeah. Well, for the purposes of me living in the UK and YouTube, I understand what you're saying is, and
I'm sorry.
I tell you what, I will do it. There are a lot of things behind around 9/11 that makes me think that there's a question that it comes down to whether there was like how low incompetence or complicit, it was allowed to happen basically.
Well, I tell you what,
And
let's not get me started on 9/11 truth discussions, because this stream would last 6 hours if we started down that. I'm sorry. I just assume that everyone I talk to in these circles is on the same page with this being a horrific psyop, and the deaths were on purpose to further the regime's goals, just like with the COVID lockdowns. Like, it's just, there's no way to fake destroying buildings and killing people, so that part they had to do for real. It's just the rest of the things around it, I think, are the lies. And so I don't think that I personally don't think that idiot camel jockey terrorists had anything to do with 9/11. I think it was other people that I don't want to name, and I think it was rotten people within the United States machine working with rotten people from a certain unnameable group that did this.
I don't
I
think
mean,
that's an unreasonable
I
belief, but carry on, AI.
I was going to say, yeah, I mean, I do. While the people who carried out the attack and everything, whether or not they, and this is something Adam Curtis does actually raise. He does point out that the functions of Al Qaeda and the functions of these people, they needed like help, higher level of help, because it was quite a coordinated level of a attack that went on. Which meant there was probably great help, and it wouldn't surprise me. And if you look at who was to benefit from further centralization, the further advancement of interests in America, I mean, yeah, a lot of those, as you would mention, a lot of those people benefited from America's war on terrorism and
Yes.
other. You have to look at who benefits from this, and that's not a conspiracy. That's just, I mean,
Yeah. Well, that goes to the thing I
yeah.
always say when it comes to this: follow the money. Look who stood to make tremendous profit. Look who stands to gain tremendous power. That is almost always the answer. And so when you look at Donald Rumsfeld just the day before talking about 2.3 trillion in federal funding being misappropriated and they couldn't find out where it went, ignore the Twin Towers, ignore Building 7 and all of the hoopla around how the buildings could fall, what really happened, blah, blah, blah. Focus only on the catcher's mitt of the Pentagon. That is where all of the budget analysts and financial bookkeeping and everything was. And you look at what was destroyed and the people killed there. That is what I think 9/11 was really about, was that. Everything else was just useful for fear-mongering and power-mongering. That, I think, was the real op, was eliminating all evidence of massive, massive amounts of United States military funding being obviated from the records and put to God knows where. That's what I think the whole thing was really about.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, certainly. I've actually got a video you uploaded recently, which we can watch in a bit, to sort of look at this position in a more comedic way.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Okay. And so moving on, so there was another post. So this is from Imperium Press. So he's got a short little video here that's worth watching. So interview with the airport agent who checked in hijacker Mohammed Atta on the 9/11. Political correctness caused 9/11, and 9/11 started the dominoes falling that are currently destroying the regime. Supreme irony. Now let's give this a watch.
Okay, fine.
Can you hear that okay, by the way?
It's a little quiet, but I can hear it.
Yeah.
If you can boost it more, do it, but I don't know if you can.
Oh, no, it's at the max volume.
Okay.
At him, and I'm saying, okay. Looks like a bottle of poison, the face he's got on. And that's when I made a mental comment to myself. And I said, if this guy don't look like an Arab terrorist, nobody does. And that thought actually went through my mind. And then I gave myself a politically correct slap for even thinking that. And he's just a guy. He's going to LA on business, I don't know. So I tagged the bag, sent them on the way, checked the ID. Okay, fine. I look at him and
Yep.
Yep. So there he's just saying, this guy looks suspicious, but no, that'd be awfully racist of me if I did that. Well, it was racist of you, but you could have saved, a lot of people's lives there. But
hey, you heard it straight from the horse's mouth. Racism saves lives, kids.
I mean, unironically, yeah. I actually, do you know what? This is the thing. It's like, in many ways, going back to like the therapeutic, sort of like the post-war Freud, like going into therapy to suppress racist and bigoted and nationalist emotions. I mean, this is sort of what happens when you do, because the thing there is, going back before, it would have been difficult because the primitive natural emotion would have looked at these particular men and thought there's something off about them. And we're going to do further investigation. And of course that, well, this is what happens. What was it, nearly 3,000 people dead?
Over 3,000, I think.
It was over 3,000. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, liberalism kills. Equality kills. I mean,
It's in the Go Free method, we call this white guilt and white erasure. If the anti-whiteism that made this man so unconfident in asserting his own people's needs was not so cucked and so destroyed in him, then he wouldn't have given himself the quote politically correct slap. He would have stood by his guns and trusted his gut and been like, wait, there's something off about this guy. And who cares if it's stereotypical or racial profiling or whatever? It doesn't matter. My gut tells me there's something wrong with this guy. And he would have been correct.
I do wonder what happened with this man who the interviewee. What happened with him like after this? Because I mean, I have no doubt. I hope that he has. He must have felt guilty, some sort of guilt. I don't know. I'm assuming. I mean, if I'd done something like that, I don't know if I could live myself with that. But
I always doubt anyone on camera. Like, I don't know how genuine any of that is. Like, with as big of an op as this was, who knows if that guy's even genuine or even real? He could just be an actor. I don't know. I haven't looked into it.
Could be.
I believe nothing anymore. Like, I know that I'm at the very end of the pipeline, but it's hard for me to believe anything that is televised and put on television, because I know just how much of a fake grift the media is about everything and has been for 20 years. So it's very difficult for me to believe anything that I see in media like this is genuine.
No, that's fair, but I mean, considering what he confessed to there, I can believe it. Considering all,
it seems genuine. I'm just saying, like, it's my gut tells me that this is genuine, but my thinking brain, my front brain, tells me, be careful with that. You've been fooled before many times. You know what I mean?
That's fair. I think we're considering this from many different angles this evening, so it's up to you, the viewer, to decide which of the various angles you believe in. And then Imperium Press, he sort of did a long thread as well. On the 23rd anniversary of 9/11, basically no one notices it. Remember when it was the 21st century Pearl Harbor? Yeah, I very much agree with him. I'd say hardly anybody remembers it anymore, and I agree. It was like the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century at one point. And so at the time, 80% of political science literature was devoted to it. Tons of gritty movies about Middle Eastern geopolitics cropped up. It seemed like a pivotal event that changed everything, totally overshadowed by the age of Trump now. It's not in the zeitgeist anymore, but 9/11 did bring back the friend-enemy distinction. The Bush-Clinton-Bush global village was supposed to triumph over the friend-enemy distinction, reducing all life to economics. 9/11 forced liberalism to confront an implacable enemy. The friend-enemy distinction was external, us versus them over there, until Trump came onto the scene. Since then, the enemy has been internal, us versus them at home, and this has been the beginning of the end for the regime. You probably don't think about 9/11 much anymore, but it did really change everything, just not right away. Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty solid mini thread there from.
I agree completely with his assessment.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember that in America did seem quite like in the weeks and months after, did seem quite united. Like the masses seemed quite united behind, the regime. Dare I say there was an element of moral unity, something that you definitely don't see today, but there definitely did seem to be, but for different reasons.
Oh no, certainly, and I will say it's very interesting that in terms of regime moral unity, they now have moral unity against Trump and MAGA. I mean, there's that meme that's been going around, and it's like Ilhan Omar and Dick Cheney, and said, go back 20 years and imagine telling a Democrat voter this is what their coalition would look like in 20 years' time.
This is the thing, though, is like the so-called like left at this, as we see, were the ones that were skeptical and questioning the Bush administration and everything came afterwards. And I I mean, we'll probably get into it, but yeah, I mean, it totally sort of folded. They've totally folded back, and even Adam Curtis, to an extent, is sort of folded back into regime talking points. You know, bearing in mind he's gone look behind the curtain so many times.
Yeah. And what Hitman said about going back 20 or 30 years and showing a picture of Ilhan Omar and Cheney and all them and being like, this is what your coalition is going to look like. It reinforces the point that I made, that Republican, Democrat, Tory, Labor doesn't matter. The regime wants what it wants. It wants power through any means and growth through any means. It wants control by any means. They don't care if they have to get it through war or peace. They don't care if they have to vilify someone abroad or someone domestic. They will do what they need to secure power and to further their goals. And this is why I don't really buy into the political circus, because I've been paying attention to it for so long. And I remember things from childhood in the 80s and 90s. Well, I wasn't really a child in the 90s, but in the 80s when I was a child, and when I was a teenager and finding adulthood in the 90s, I remember how war was considered to be a right-wing Republican thing. And then all of that changed, hasn't it? Where now the well, I mean, the left has always hated Israel, supposedly, but like the left seemingly was the we don't want war machine bad people. Now it's the so-called right who are like that. And I think that distinction doesn't really matter. That's why I hate the left-right distinction, and I do my best not even to use it. But it shows you that the people that you can check a box for and vote for don't really have much influence over what the regime wants and what the regime will do. And I think that the regime picks people and puts forward people for whatever team they think is taking prominence or whatever will be most useful towards their hegemonic control goals. And it just so happens that right now, Trump and the so-called right-wing people are against the regime. So the left, the so-called leftoid people are the regime party right now. But that could all change. That's why I say don't, like, until I see Trump become even 10% of the dictator of the orange Hitler that the media says he is, I don't think for a second that he is not just going to be the regime shifting gears back to the so-called right being the pet of the regime. That's what I think that the regime is gearing up for, is a swing back in that direction. And again, look at Russia. Look what's going on in the Middle East. Look at what China is doing. The back and forth between China and other countries. What's going on with Taiwan. I think that the regime sees massive conflict and war on the horizon. And if you got the pedal down on anti-whiteism and saying whitey is evil and all these leftoids in charge, then you're not going to get the millions of white boys to be interested in your regime war. But if you put MAGA and Trump in the White House, then that could actually get thousands and thousands of white boys to go die for Israel again. And so that's why I think that the regime is gearing up to swing back right and have Trump as the figurehead. That seems completely reasonable with what I've experienced and remember of the last 40 years of the American government behavior. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, man.
Yeah, no, I think that's what AA's prediction is, that the regime are gearing up for Trump and is essentially going to be a Reagan 2.0. Now, I can certainly see the possibility, but there's also the possibility that the regime are totally insane and no, they just want, Kamala Bumba, as Red Hawk likes to call her.
And remember, when we talk about the deep state, it's not like they all go to the same meeting room and they're all on the same page. The deep state has different goals and has different peoples in it. It's like just how you can't say all the Jews are the same or all the Muslims are the same. We know that's not true. Not all of the factions of the deep state are the same. I think some of them really do believe in idealistic globalism. I think some of them really are big brain global gay race communist type people, and they hate Trump. And that is the element that I think probably leaks information and helps radicalize people through the media to have these lunatics be easy to tap to be would-be assassins for Trump. So I do think there is at least a faction of the deep state which is anti-Trump and doesn't want him and wants things to not be like I just predicted. But it seems like the ones with power and influence that are dominating right now are gearing up for a Trump victory this November and a swing back to the right for the public face of the government, or the public face of the regime, I should say. That's what it seems like to me. But I don't think that all of these people are the same, because that's foolish. I think they all have different agendas and different goals, and they have different ideals for the future that they want. It's just, I think the war machine global hegemony party, or if you want to call them that, within the U.S. deep state or the U.S. regime, I think mostly are seeing massive conflict and war on the horizon with ever worsening economic conflict, and they want that Reagan figure back in the public limelight, and I think that's what they're gearing up towards.
No, I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens in November.
We certainly will. It'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Well, what I've got up here is this is a little excerpt from a book called Millennium. It's released by an author called Marty Phillips. Potentially has actually reviewed this book, and the reason I want to share it is it's a novel, and it's I think it's by Antelope Hill, the publisher, and it's all about these 4 different people that experience like 9/11 from different perspectives. But I just want to read this little preface because it's relevant to our topic. So, the millennial generation has lived a tragic existence thus far. Theirs has not been a time of turmoil and conflict on a global scale as with prior generations, but like a dreamer experiencing a nightmare, they have watched massive changes overtake them with little control over the world they inherit. They are the children of September 11th, coming under an age of an oppressive wave of alarmist and hyperreal media events as reality shifted beneath their feet in less dramatic but more insidious ways. The results have been a massive shifts in racial demographics, economic decline, and institutional decay. They had one brief and fleeting glimpse of a much more decent country with semi-functional civics, a stabilising white majority proud of their history, affordable housing, and a broad middle class. While constantly derided by older generations for their timidity and lack of work ethic, American millennials have experienced primarily deception, disappointment, and open derision from the nation's elites and from their elders who earned wealth in more favourable economic times. The millennials' existence is apocalyptic by the very nature of when they were born and what they were told about the future. Throughout childhood, it was relentlessly pounded into them that they would have to be the ones to save the world from environmental and geopolitical disaster, yet all methods to do so were withheld from them by the very people who made these demands. They took on a massive debt led on by the lies of charismatic political charlatans and the corrupt, seemingly omnipotent financial order. They're the unwitting prisoners of what was once a nation of opportunity. And yeah, I don't disagree with that.
I mean, that seems like a very true assessment of the last 25 years.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I do remember that. Things are going to be better, and the generation's going to be yours, and it's like not worked out that way.
It certainly hasn't. And the most important thing, I think, to take away from that right there is the lie part. Is people like I'm on the cusp of millennial and Gen X. I'm 45, and my generation and the younger people that are considered millennials, we grew up in the 80s and 90s, and we were told we were post-racial, that it didn't matter what race someone was born as or what religion their family raised them as, that we were all going into this future together, and that we were going to make a better world because of how things were going. And that was a big fat evil lie to weaken us. And when I say us, I mean white people, people of European descent, people who are the rightful inheritors of Western civilization. We were lied to and manipulated by these rotten bureaucracies and evil, decrepit, anti-white scumbags in government and media. And I think that this disgusting system set us up for failure on purpose. And these 2 paragraphs encapsulate that perfectly.
No, you were sold like a paradise, and it ends up being a bit of a living hell in some respects. So
yes,
but the funny thing is, like, from a lot of people today, though, Hitman, remember it as a paradise and want to return to that era, even though, especially those like the people who are like these commentators online, and they say, well, go back to a time where it wasn't about race, it was about the content of one's character. But even that
was never true. That was always a lie.
That was never true. It was always a lie, because look at the classic example that I would always refer to is the race riots in LA, and was it 92?
Yeah, I think it was either 91 or 92. It was very early 90s. Yeah.
early 90s. And then you look at, I mean, even like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, that TV show that AA likes to refer to, even in that, there are episodes where there's incredible anti-white American bigotry and behaviors demonstrated by
And that
the
was not
characters
unique to
in
that program, by the way. That was already
no, no,
starting
no.
to become common by the end of the 80s across television, and by the end of the 90s, it was far more prevalent.
Yeah, so that sort of post-racial 90s utopia was, again, it was just another lie. And you know, but the thing there is that you've got all these commentators now saying, well, we want to return to that. It's like, well, you just want to return to like another period of the rot where it wasn't all
Right.
consuming.
And also, I think it's foolish for people to talk about we want to go back, whether it's someone who views the Third Reich with romantic lenses and they want to return, so to speak, or whether it's these hopeful content creators that are like, hey guys, remember the 80s and 90s when everything was peaceful and cool? Like, these people don't realize there is no going back. It doesn't matter if you think one part of history was better. You can't go back to it. We can only go forward with what we have available now. And what we have available to us now is a product of the last 100 years of anti-white lies and punishment, and the false hopes and empty promises fed to us by our lying, evil, decrepit regime and the media that they puppet. Like, the only way out of this is going to be surviving a long, hard winter of decline. We've done it before, and I'm hopeful that we can. But the massive demographic replacement, I think, is the anti-white machine's Hail Mary pass at the end of the fourth quarter. Forgive my American sport reference. I think that it is their last-ditch effort to beat us, is to racially remove us and eliminate us so we are no longer a threat. Just like from the Braveheart movie. Well, that's the problem with Scotland. It's full of Scots. We're just going to breed them out. It's that same energy, that same mentality that drives these people to demographically replace us all and destroy us.
And it's interesting you mentioned Braveheart, yes, because I have to wonder if that film was in not some way an attack on because you know I really don't like that film personally because
No, I don't either.
you know, because you know it's very unflattering towards English people.
It is, and I think that's on purpose because it denigrates one of the greatest white ethnicities on earth, and I think that's on purpose because look who created it. Hollywood created it. Hollywood's full of anti-whiteism. Hollywood loves to punish white people and make us all look like either rural pill-popping racists or colonialist, arrogant shitbags that just want to, you know, tyrannically control over minorities and shit. Like, Hollywood paints us this way all the time.
Well, yeah, and it is, I mean, going on a sidetrack, but it represents like William Wallace's army is like some sort of democratically elected thing going on. I mean, it's completely mental as a thing. I mean, it's terrible. I mean, as someone who's interested in sort of the various English Scottish wars around that time, it's terrible. And the real William Wallace would be disgusted to be depicted as like a barbaric Highland clansman running around like that. I mean, he would have been a glorious noble on a knight, and he would have seen that film as a terrible insult, terrible insult indeed on his character.
And also, the English people should be insulted as well because it painted the English people as like they were all either, I don't know, some kind of uncaring, unfeeling tyrant that had no sympathy for their common man up in Scotland. Like, it's just, I understand the criticisms of that film. I only remember the line because it stands out in my mind as to what's being done to us today.
I think Hitman, I mean, the in the film you got, is it Edward II, the Prince, Edward II?
Yeah, it's about Edward I is the king, but yeah, she's also got his son Edward II, who's
Edward II is sort of depicted as this like this. I can't use the F word in it, but you can guess what I mean. Like this absolute pussy, right? He's this absolute pussy and everything. And again, he was an excellent warrior. I mean, that's another thing. He was an excellent warrior. He wasn't like this weakling in the film. He was an excellent warrior in his own right. He was a very skilled swordsman. very skilled indeed in like real life. And so, yeah, I mean, you do see like this total denigration of historical characters in TV films like this, and particularly in English
and the anti-whites in Hollywood love to depict us that way. They love to poison the well. They love to erase and destroy our history and turn our beloved or important historical figures against us. They've been doing it for decades.
No, certainly. And so it's at this point I actually want to move on to the first of our short videos, which is the one you uploaded, Yizz. So this is a re-upload from somebody called Mr. Brightside, and it's called 9/11 Ignorance is Strength. So
quick note, I was told that Mr. Brightside simply re-upped this from the Corbett report. The Corbett report is the guy who put this together.
Oh, good to know. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
On the morning of September 11th, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters, directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world, using a satellite phone and a laptop, directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York, while in Washington, a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon in the budget analyst office where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10th, 2001. Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes.
Osama bin Laden.
The pundits knew within hours.
Osama bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbored them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish.
Well, what do they say? The mafia investigates the mafia and found the mafia has done
Yeah,
nothing.
exactly. That is exactly accurate to what happened. Yes.
I'm sorry, but like the passport, just like when the plane hit the building and the passport was.
Yes, and that's why the newscaster even said, if you can believe that, like, because he clearly didn't believe it because he was an old man, right? He was like, "You're telling me that a terrorist piece of crap flew a plane that, hundreds of feet off the ground, hit a building, and immediately incinerated in a giant fireball of jet fuel, and his passport somehow survived down on the ground." I don't buy it. That's bullshit.
I mean, like, it seems like, like when Indiana Jones, when he's like flown off a cliff with a tank or something, and then he loses his hat, and then suddenly the hat just reappears. I mean, it's as daft as that. I mean, come on. This is why we require better quality of psyop propaganda.
I demand better psyops.
I demand better psyops.
I demand better news slop.
Yeah. But go ahead. We can finish the video.
It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WTC-7, Able Danger, P-Tech, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time that those events were actually happening. It was lied to by the Pentagon, the CIA, the Bush administration, and as for Bush and Cheney, well, no one knows what they told it because they testified in secret, off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors. It didn't bother to look at who funded the attacks because that question is ultimately of little practical significance. Still, the 9/11 Commission did brilliantly answering all of the questions the public had, except most of the victims' family members' questions, and pinned blame on all the people responsible, although no one so much as lost their job, determining the attacks were
failure of imagination.
Because
nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
Except the Pentagon, FEMA, NORAD, and the NRO. The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. The SEC destroyed their records on the investigation into the insider trading before the attacks, but that's okay because destroying the records of the largest investigation in SEC history is just part of routine record keeping. NIST has classified the data that they used for their model of WTC7's collapse, but that's okay because knowing how they made their model of the collapse would jeopardize public safety. The FBI has argued that all material related to their investigation of 9/11 should be kept secret from the public, but that's okay because the FBI probably has nothing to hide. This man never existed, nor is anything he had to say worthy of your attention, and if you say otherwise, you are a paranoid conspiracy theorist and deserve to be shunned by all of humanity. Likewise him, and her. And her, and her, and him. Osama bin Laden lived in a cave fortress in the hills of Afghanistan, but somehow got away. Then he was hiding out in Tora Bora, but somehow got away. Then he lived in Abbottabad for years, taunting the most comprehensive intelligence dragnet employing the most sophisticated technology in the history of the world for a decade, releasing video after video with complete impunity and getting younger and younger as he did so, before finally being found in a daring SEAL team raid which wasn't recorded on video, in which he didn't resist or use his wife as a human shield, and in which these crack special forces operatives panicked and killed this unarmed man, supposedly the best source of intelligence about those dastardly terrorists on the entire planet. Then they dumped his body in the ocean before telling anyone about it. Then a couple dozen of that team's members died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. This is the story of 9/11, brought to you by the media which told you the hard truths about
his head could be seen to move violently forward.
And
they took the babies out of the incubators.
And
mobile production facilities.
And
the rescue of Jessica Lynch.
If you have any questions about this story, you are a batshit paranoid tinfoil dog-abusing baby hater and will be reviled by everyone. If you love your country and or freedom, happiness, rainbows, rock and roll, puppy dogs, apple pie, and your grandma, you will never ever express doubts about any part of this story to anyone. Ever. This has been a public service announcement by the Friends of the FBI, CIA, NSA, DIA, SEC, MSM, White House, NIST, and the 9/11 Commission. Because ignorance is strength.
Amazing video, Yizz.
Yeah, it's now that I know who created it, hats off to the Corbett Report for making that. That's an incredible little snippet there, and it really does encapsulate just how ridiculous it is to believe the official narrative around 9/11. Because I remember just after it happened, you could find videos, you could watch interviews with people talking about hearing explosions before the buildings fell, talking about seeing interesting looking things at airports. And then not long after that is when 9/11 Truth really exploded, talking about the drone control modules being affixed to planes. That's also when it surfaced almost maybe like within a week or two after. You had people bringing up, hey, wasn't the CIA or wasn't there actually something in the 90s that, or in the late 80s and early 90s, where they were talking about what it would be like if there were planes being flown into buildings? And things started coming out where there was so many questions that weren't being answered. And during this time, they were kicking the can down the road with Mafia Investigates Mafia. And almost immediately, that's when the war on terror started and became a huge thing. And then in a couple of years, here came the lies of weapons of mass destruction and Saddam Hussein is the new Hitler and all this other stuff. And it's like, I remember being a young adult then. I was in my young 20s or mid 20s by that point. And when I saw just what a televised circus the war in Iraq was, I thought to myself, something is wrong. And my gut told me that this was not something that I should believe was real. And I know that people really went to Iraq and people killed each other and stuff. I'm not saying that was all make-believe, but I'm saying what I was being told as an American, that was the first time in my life I really started, that it really sank in that the media and the government were my enemy and they were lying to me and using me. I remember thinking that watching televised missile strikes in Iraq in like 2003 or 4, whenever it was. I remember sitting there on the couch thinking, something is wrong here, and these people are lying to me, and they're probably the bad guys. And I've never really come back from that, and I've kind of been a truther ever since.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I just remembered, there's a documentary, 9/11 documentary, which is probably one of the best ones that I'm aware of out there. And it was by these two French brothers. I think one's called is Gideon. I forgot what the other fellow was called. And they were following the. It was actually they were doing a documentary on on a fire crew house about this newbie, and it just happened to coincide with 9/11, and they were in the vicinity while it happened, so they caught it all on first hand. And one thing you go through the footage because there's not like commentary; it's just like raw footage as the events unfold. And there's a lot of like FBI, ATF. There's a lot of like those sorts of alphabet agency agents on the ground running around and everything while this was going on. And you even had like fire brigade, or sorry, what do you call them?
Firemen?
Yeah, firemen or the fire chiefs. That's it, fire chiefs.
Oh,
fire chiefs saying in communication the explosion on like this building, explosion on this building. And this was over radio. This wasn't it, because you think, oh, maybe they were in one building, they weren't seeing what was happening. But yeah, I mean, I mean, that's a good one to watch because that you see how it unfolds. And in some ways, the alphabet agency people on the ground weren't really helping because they were sort of interrupting the fire chiefs and sort of causing confusion and panic when like the
what, a U.S. government agency sowing seeds of fear and malcontent? No, certainly not. Say it's not so.
Yeah, they were called. Yeah, is that they had like these command at the lobby of the trade center buildings, and yeah, you had like some FBI person going like, what about this? What about that? They're sort of running around, sort of interrupting people in like conversation and everything. It was just like, even watching it sort of secondhand, you think to yourself, oh, this guy, someone needs to tell him to shut up at this point. He's causing too much trouble already.
Certainly. I just want to address a comment from Ardent Party. So everybody said the Iraq invasion was all about W wanting to go after the guy who talked shit and tried to assassinate his daddy. Well, it's interesting you bring that up, Ardent Party, because from my understanding, one of the reasons for the 2003 invasion was because Paul Wolfowitz, who was the Deputy Secretary of Defense under Rumsfeld, he actually served in Bush Senior's administration, and he was one of the biggest war hawks for so when they defeated the Iraqis and drove them out of Kuwait, he was like, right, we need to roll on to Baghdad. And Bush Senior was like, what the fuck, are you crazy? No, we've defeated them, let's stop. And Wolfowitz was furious, and yeah, we got into
like I said earlier, it's not really the elected officials, even the president, it's what the regime wants.
Yeah.
Well, at the UN, you had that dubious character that they brought to give evidence about that mobile command missile firing chemical like factory, like some crazy like that. Like every time I think of that, I think about those walkers in Star Wars, like the just like massive vehicle that can achieve everything that Saddam had, and it was in the desert, and I remember in the UK years there was like maps drawn on the newspapers showing Iraq and showing like these in the deserts this fictional struck this fictional vehicle that could fire missiles that could hit Britain and hit Europe, and
that was all just a war machine fear mongering. None of that was true. It was all made up.
Yeah, it was straight up made up. And I know the people in the intelligence services, in particularly in Britain, but in America, they all knew it was total. Even the lowest, people not in the command structure, but like those that worked within the system, knew it was total bullshit.
Yeah.
No, on party, the derp state.
Yeah. That's a good one, Artie.
Also, I still haven't figured out why they need to remove Gaddafi, but it's interesting you bring up Gaddafi because there's something else I discovered about him.
I know why. Do you know why?
Well, there's another Adam Curtis documentary called Hypernormalization, and in Hypernormalization, Adam Curtis reveals how Gaddafi in the 80s was hated because they believed he was the source of all the terror attacks, like the Lockerbie bombing. which he falsely claimed responsibility for when it was actually Hafez al-Assad, the president of Syria. And then later they decided, oh, we actually want good relations with Gaddafi. I know. What we'll do is after we invade Iraq, we'll get Gaddafi to give up his weapons of mass destruction, which he doesn't have. And Gaddafi's like, yes, I will give up the weapons of mass destruction, which I don't possess. And they made a public display of like disposing these supposed weapons of mass destruction, which he never had. And then Troy Evans is like, nah, let's just eliminate him anyway.
I think the main reason they wanted rid of him is he was vocally against the petrodollar, and he did not support the U.S. oil hegemony. He did not want the U.S. dollar. The BRICS wasn't a thing yet, but he was of that mentality, that to be a slave to the U.S. petrodollar was to be a slave to the American machine, and he did not want that, and he rejected that. And I think that's the real reason why people like him cannot be tolerated by this machine.
No, certainly that would make sense. So that's what he wanted to achieve.
And also ISIS, ISIS, the very organic Sunni Islamist group, organic, in a CIA lab, homegrown in a CIA lab, was able to take over large areas of what was it, Eastern Syria, in Benghazi, in Eastern Syria, Eastern Libya, even after the civil war there.
Well, what actually happened is ISIS was largely made up of remnants of the Iraqi military because with Iraq, Saddam Hussein and most of the Iraqi upper command were Sunnis, where Iraq is a majority Shia country. And so what happened is when the Americans and British deposed him, because the government of Iraq is a Shiite government. So for the first time in its history, Iraq actually has a government that represents the religious confession of the majority of the population. And so when you have these Sunni minority that's been dispossessed of its power, all of these officers and soldiers go off and join an Islamic militant group, along with.
Yeah. I was going to say, sorry to confuse you. Yeah, that with Iraq, because I want to say with Libya, you had the rebel-backed groups, which then sort of metastasized into territories in after the civil war, sort of coming under that ISIS affiliated or North African ISIS chapter or whatever was described. Again, it was the regime's decision to basically make it was like 150,000 Iraqi, because of course they abolished the Ba'athist Party and what was it? They made 150 odd thousand Iraqi like police officers redundant, but were able to keep their arms, and the same happened to like the remaining standing of the military. And so it was a total disaster. I would say not disaster, it was a total and utter mess that was deliberately created and really did destroy they got rid of people in Iraq who were that kept the basic infrastructure going, but no, because they're part of the Ba'athist Party, we're just going to totally remove them. And
well, if you want my opinion, I think one of the reasons they wanted to get rid of Saddam is because there's a certain country in the Middle East wasn't a fan of Saddam and thought he was a threat. So yeah, America had to prioritize his destruction for that reason.
But here's the thing: a lot of people in our connected spheres of discourse seem to believe that certain group is in the driver's seat, and that is not what I see with being an American and observing my evil, rotten government for the last 25 years. I think that certain group has a considerable amount of power. And however, I do not think that that particular country and its people in the Middle East are in the driver's seat of the American hegemony war machine. I think that is a different cluster of people. And I think that they are subordinate to the Pentagon and the deep state war machine people. I don't think it's the other way around. And I'm not saying they don't have considerable power and influence, but when you look at if that particular group wanted rid of that man, then the regime would have done it when it was the easiest and the earliest opportunity, which was Operation Desert Storm in the early to mid 90s, 10 years before the big war in Iraq. They could have done it then. And they would have had, by I mean, not by my personal reasoning, but by their reasoning, they would have had valid grounds to do so because he was doing war crimes to people. Like, I think it was the Kurds he gassed or something. I don't remember, but it's, if that particular group was the one calling the shots, why didn't they pull the trigger, so to speak, on Saddam 10 years earlier? But it was not convenient for the American hegemony war machine at the time for a few different reasons. But it was after the 9/11 thing. It was when they launched the war on terror. They needed their new Hitler. They needed the Saddam then, and they needed to have a head to put on a pike for the victory dance. That's why I think that's one of the many things I can point to show that that particular group is not the one in the driver's seat of this giant machine. I do think that they are a powerful secondary group in the machine, but I don't think that they're in the driver's seat. I think that's the Pentagon and the U.S. war machine in Washington.
No, I think that's a fair point. And just to address another comment, so Big O's, he gassed the Kurds, also known as Marsh Arabs. Well, that's a very problematic expression. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, any Kurds listening are probably going to be triggered by you saying that. So. Okay. Well,
again, I mean, he did protect the Iraqi Christians who, again, after Western intervention, you know, the oldest Christian communities in the world, or up there at least, you know, were totally decimated.
No, more than that, they're practically non-existent now. They were eradicated.
As Naomi Al-Carson says, in the 1980s, up to 23% of the population of Iraq was Christian, though the Christian represents only 0.4% of the population. And both Bush and Blair both gave as one of their justifications for the invasion was we need to safeguard the Christian peoples from this monstrous dictator, and all your invasion did was just drive them all out.
I mean, these monsters, pretty much you can expect the opposite of what they say to be their motives, pretty much all the time.
No, absolutely. I think that's there's many cases, many such cases.
If they say it's good for the British people, it's bad for the British people. If they say it'll be good for the economy, it'll be bad for the economy. If they say, you get my point. Like, it's these people, when I say these people, these cretins in our governments, the mouthpieces that we hear and read about in our news, they are agents of the devil. They are evil anti-white vermin. They are our enemy. I don't care if they're our own race or if they say they're our religion. They are not. They are evil devils, and they should be named and shamed accordingly.
And at this point, I actually want to watch the Bush's Axis of Evil speech, because I think you see a very much a intensifying of the rhetoric around this time. So,
from threatening America or our friends and allies with weapons of mass destruction. Some of these regimes have been pretty quiet since September the 11th, but we know their true nature. North Korea is a regime arming with missiles and weapons of mass destruction while starving its citizens. Iran aggressively pursues these weapons and exports terror, while an unelected few repress the Iranian people's hope for freedom. Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror. The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons for over a decade.
All lies, by the way. No proof.
This is a regime that has already used poison gas to murder thousands of its own citizens, leaving the bodies of mothers huddled over their dead children. This is a regime that agreed to international inspections, then kicked out the inspectors. This is a regime that has something to hide from the civilized world. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world. By seeking weapons of mass destruction, these regimes pose a grave and growing danger. They could provide these arms to terrorists, giving them the means to match their hatred. They could attack our allies or attempt to blackmail the United States. In any of these cases, the price of indifference would be catastrophic. We will work closely with our coalition to deny terrorists and their state sponsors the materials, technology, and expertise to make and deliver weapons of mass destruction. We will develop and deploy effective missile defenses to protect America and our allies from sudden attack. And all nations should know America will do what is necessary to ensure our nation's security. We'll be deliberate, yet time is not on our side. I will not wait on events while dangers gather. I will not stand by as peril draws closer and closer. The United States of America will not permit the world's most dangerous regimes to threaten us with the world's most destructive weapons.
Like watching this with
Fantastic, eh?
hindsight only validates the beliefs that I've cultivated the last 10 years. Like everything that he said was pretty much a lie. And all of the buzzwords and things he said, like calling it axis of evil and all of that, it's what I said earlier in the stream. It's the machine creating its new Hitler so it can do what it does, which is expanding its power and securing its economic resources. Like that's all this is.
I mean, not to mention like building up their new villain. I mean, of course, like all these weapons and destructive, chemical weapons that Saddam possessed was solely because he was America's guy fighting the Iranians after they kicked out the Shah.
Yep.
It's
Like
funny you say
the
that.
CIA does this all the time. Like Russia did this too during the Cold War. Don't forget, they would arm satellite states or allies in the Mideast or whatever, and America did the same. And then when it's convenient to call them terrorists and evil people, oh hey, look, we have a brand new whipping boy ready to go. Put him in the limelight. Let's go kick the crap out of this poor sand country because of the reasons I've already stated. Like it's just, I'm so sick of this. I hate this. Like the American military machine and the political apparatus around it is just so decrepit and so evil and rotten. I hate it.
No, you're right to believe that, Yizz. And just to go back to the Iranians, it's interesting because I think this speech was such a stupid thing to do, to lump Iran in with Iraq, because the Iranians and the Iraqis absolutely hated each other. Because remember, Saddam had invaded Iran and started the Iran-Iraq war. And not only that, the Iranians had actually made an effort to try and work with the Americans. So when the Americans invaded Afghanistan, because Iran's next door, they literally said, "Oh, we're happy to give you some support and aid because we don't like the Taliban either." And what does Bush do? You're just as evil as Iraq. I was like, moronic diplomacy. It's just like you're all the same.
And Rory Stewart, who is this bumbling creep in British politics, has done I think he's got a book on his time when he was working as a it's like he described like a colonial, is like sort of modern day colonial governor in Basra province in southern Iraq. During the sort of occupation period, and because of the ineptitude actions of the Western forces, it allowed in his particular province, which was majority Shire and had closer because of that connection, closely aligned with Iran and the teachings of the various ayatollahs. You had effectively this allowed they allowed this power vacuum to come into place, and for Iranian forces to, I mean, basically there was no the border that was there it might as well not have been there. The sphere of influence was as it is today. I mean, Iraq is effectively under the control of Iran. Syria has that strong, with the Alawites, a connection with the Iranian regime, and in Lebanon again, very closely aligned. I mean, I think sort of like a client state. So
well, 1/3 of Lebanon, it's Hezbollah is the main connection there.
Yeah, wasn't one of the presidents, wasn't he forced to resign or something, or he left the country, and there was a bit of a like.
Well, Lebanon's situation is very complicated. It's a shame we
It's a
don't have Hunger
complicated.
here.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm probably oversimplifying it massively in that
Yeah.
regard, but
Yeah.
yeah.
If only we had Hunger here, Yizz. Well, Lebanon is essentially
Yeah.
sectarian. Like you've got 1/3 is Sunni, 1/3 Shia, 1/3 Christian,
Yeah.
and so but obviously most of these Shiites are on the southern border with Israel, and that's why Hezbollah is such a problem for the Israelis. Okay. And Ardent Party. Oh, does no one remember the end of Rambo 3 high from the call outs to the brave fighters of the Mujahideen?
Yes, I remember that. Well, also in Living Daylights, in that Timothy Dalton Bond, they were like, he was having like a party with them at the end, with the defeated the Soviets, the Soviet bad guys at that base, that airfield base, and him and the Mujahideen were living it up afterwards.
Oh, wonderful. Well, before we move on, I think we need to give George Bush his just dues. Amazing clip.
Based Arab.
Yes. I don't know if you've seen it, but there's like a Fallout version of that where it's like that's thrown in when he's like throwing the shoe. Okay.
Dodgy critical camera shot where it sort of spazzes out and misses or something. Yeah.
Well, it's at this time of the stream. We're now going to look through some clips from the Adam Curtis documentary, The Power of Nightmares. So, like we did with the Oceans Apart clips, we'll sort of watch a bit and then we'll comment as we go along.
Sounds good.
Cool.
In the past, politicians promised to create a better world. They had different ways of achieving this, but their power and authority came from the optimistic visions they offered their people. Those dreams failed, and today people have lost faith in ideologies. Increasingly, politicians are seen simply as managers of public life. But now, they have discovered a new role that restores their power and authority. Instead of delivering dreams, politicians now promise to protect us from nightmares. They say...
Oh, sorry, what was that?
I just said that's a really good line. Instead of promising us dreams, they vow to protect us from nightmares. That's a really good line. Because they're the ones who protect us from the nightmares the regime creates. And now I think that a lot of the politicians are in on it.
No, absolutely. I mean, it all goes back to Machiavelli. Fear is more effective than love.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, true.
That they will rescue us from dreadful dangers that we cannot see and do not understand. And the greatest danger of all is international terrorism, a powerful and sinister network with sleeper cells in countries across the world. A threat that needs to be fought by a war on terror. But much of this threat is a fantasy which has been exaggerated and distorted by politicians. It's a dark illusion that has spread unquestioned through governments around the world, the security services, and the international media. This is a series of films about how and why that fantasy was created, and who it benefits. At the heart of the story are two groups, the American neoconservatives and the radical Islamists. Both were idealists who were born out of the failure of the liberal dream to build a better world. And both had a very similar explanation of what caused that failure. These two groups have changed the world, but not in the way that either intended. Together, They created today's nightmare vision of a secret, organised evil that threatens the world. A fantasy that politicians then found restored their power and authority in a disillusioned age. And those with the darkest fears became the most powerful. In January 2001, a trial began in a Manhattan courtroom of 4 men accused of the embassy bombings in East Africa. But the Americans had also decided to prosecute bin Laden in his absence. But to do this under American law, the prosecutors needed evidence of a criminal organisation, because as with the mafia, that would allow them to prosecute the head of the organisation, even if he could not be linked directly to the crime. And the evidence for that organisation was provided for them by an ex-associate of bin Laden's called Jamal al-Fadl. The picture al-Fadl drew for the Americans of bin Laden was of an all-powerful figure at the head of a large terrorist network.
Yeah, I love Curtis's use of like clips. It's just like
I just imagine like the CIA brought in like this fucking guy dressed like Sinbad to deliver this this retelling of this organization. I mean, yeah.
You said Padfa. It's called The Power of Nightmares by Adam Curtis. If you just put it into YouTube, there's quite a few versions that are up.
Yeah, you can find the Adam Curtis videos. They're surprisingly still around. You'd think the regime would get rid of them, but I guess they don't.
Oh, I should mention this documentary was done in 2004, so right after Iraq.
Because the Iraq operation was 2002 to 2004, right? Or 2003?
2003,
Yeah,
2009.
Yeah. It's quite interesting looking at this documentary at its time, because this was something that a lot of liberals and self-professed progressives lauded over, and this was utterly condemned by people in Fox News and other neoconservative figures as being supporting of the terrorists and everything. And the funny thing is, watching this documentary and looking at as we sort of analyze this, I actually don't think any liberal at the time really watched it. Or if they did watch it, they didn't really understand, because they were. I think they were just looking at it and saying, "Oh, that he's bashing the neocons for being, simple-minded and Machiavellian and sort of incompetent." So, it's interesting, because today, if you were to sit down someone who is a self-professed liberal progressive, I think they would just sit there and say, "Oh, this is full of conspiracy theories, outlandish conspiracy theorists, reactionary, perceptions, and bigoted and racist and all that, the usual stuff."
Yeah,
No, certainly.
I mean,
I just
you're
think,
right.
Unfortunately,
that's
carry
a
on.
product of living under this never-ending propaganda. Like when that's when I one of the best articles I ever wrote was called PsyOps 101: Why the Big Lie, and in that I expressed to the reader that the purpose of all of this propaganda is not to make you believe it's all true, but is to make you doubt that anything is true. The purpose of this is to drive people mad and make them and force them to believe in nonsense, because then there's nothing left. There's nothing left of these people. Like when you try to argue with someone who's been to university or who is just, a midwit idiot that thinks they know stuff, but all they know is media and academic programming. They adhere to those points, to the propaganda, stronger than the most staunch religious person clinging to their religious beliefs. Because a religious person who staunchly believes in his or her religion, they usually are still grounded in reality to the point to where they can have a conversation. But the people who are radicalized and programmed by this, they have such a fervent, passionate response to anything that chips away at the narrative, because you are forcing them to confront the delusions that they live in. and it becomes a fanatical psychosis that it becomes like a fanatic defending a religion, but they're really fanatical about it because they're defending their sense of self. You confront them with an existential crisis when you make them think that the regime has lied to them, and it's even more fervent than a religious zealot. That's why these conversations you can't have with so many people these days, because we are generations into this never-ending mind war of forcing people to say there are 5 lights.
Well, the thing is, my view is the reason you can't have these conversations is that if you try to, these people will cope, because if they acknowledge what you're saying is true, it'll break their mind, because it's all of the conditioning that's been built up all these years.
Yeah.
I don't think they could handle it. They'd go mad.
Yeah, I mean, the thesis of this documentary is basically that the Islamists and the neocons, their conception, their origin story is shared because they both saw the individualistic nature of America and aspects of American materialistic culture as a threat to, well, from people like Leo Strauss. From his perspective, he viewed it as a threat, the nihilism as a threat to American society. And then from Said Qutb,
Said Qutb.
Qutb, sorry, basically the father of Islamist thinking. He was the mentor to Zahawi, who was the mentor to Bin Laden. Viewed it as a threat to the Islamic world. There's one quote here, actually, Hitman, I'll just bring up quickly. I thought this is from Said. I'll just bring it up. That was it. Isolated beings driven by primitive animal forces. That's how he described when he was in Colorado. Because of course he was worked in Egyptian schools, and he went over there to see how the American education system in 1949, and he was shocked to see that at this dance hall, these American teenagers dancing in the ways where they were imitating effectively sexual acts. And while dancing, and this was when he saw in his mind how much of a threat America was. And it's quite funny because on my channel we've been covering the Richard Hilton book on the mysterious death of the British Empire, and also if you look at like Evola in Italy, talking about society in Italy after the war. All of them, even Leo Strauss and Said here, were also come to the same observation that actually what's happening in quote unquote popular culture is damaging or really threatening the social fabric of their own societies.
No, absolutely. And it's interesting you mentioned him not liking the dancing there and describing it as being sexual. I mean, I can only imagine if he was still alive and lived to see twerking.
Oh my God, it's so disgusting.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. And the funny thing is, he went from being, well, this has been forced by the elites in Egypt, so we must form a vanguard, like what was going on in other parts of the sort of Islamic world, and to combat this. And then Zahawi, I think it was Zahawi who sort of tried to take inspiration, and Bin Laden inspiration from the Iranian Revolution. It came to this realization that actually in their minds that it wasn't so much the elites being corrupted, but the masses have been corrupted with this as well. And so this is why you have the whole, well, they can justify attacks on civilians in their own countries, like Egypt, like other places as well. And so you have this, as a result of the American regime's power in the world, it especially in the Middle East, it ended up having this generations of, I guess you could say, opponents being born. Though, yeah, with the neocon side of the story, though, I don't know if we'll cover it, but they end up sort of becoming the, you know, the taking advantage of what both groups who originated in the same position, you know, came to the different outcomes, and it gave neocons a new, let's say, like a lease of life. They became front and center.
Well, I'd say with the clips I've got, it's mostly focusing on the neocon side. I haven't really got that much of the Islamist side, because the neocon side was more relevant to our topic. So
yeah, I mean, the Islamist side is basically the it starts with the Saeed Qutb and goes to Sahawi and Bin Laden. That's the sort of line of connection. With the NASA, but again, you know, people like NASA, who was backed by the Americans, he brought in a secular Egypt, and that was totally against what Saeed, who was, you know, part of the Muslim Brotherhood, wanted. And I believe I don't know if he was involved. He was executed in '66, so it was the Muslim Brotherhood afterwards that were involved with the assassination of Sadat, I believe.
yes, it was. Yeah, it was Zahawi and the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah, that's right. That they were the ones that took out Sadat, and the idea was that with the assassination of Sadat, there would be an Islamic uprising in Egypt, which would, you know, a revolution. But of course, that didn't happen. And
well, let's carry on.
That had an organised hierarchy of control. He also said that bin Laden had given this network a name, Al-Qaeda. It was a dramatic and powerful picture of bin Laden, but it bore little relationship to the truth. The reality was that bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri had become the focus of a loose association of disillusioned Islamist militants who were attracted by the new strategy. But there was no organisation.
I mean, think about this compared to what the regime talks about people like us. It's like, oh, with this dangerous right-wing, far-right, white nationalist.
And we're,
you know,
and we're really just a bunch of malcontent people who don't have any organization and don't have any power. We're just upset malcontents at what's being done to us, the same as these people.
Exactly, yeah.
No genuine power at all.
But instead of drones bombing our kids get bombed with transgenderism and anti-whiteism.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and
these were militants who.
Sorry, I was going to say quickly. In many ways, the greatest recruiting tool for people like bin Laden and the various Islamist groups that surrounded him was subsequent American and Western foreign policy after 9/11. Yeah, I mean, it really bolstered their, but did bolster them because it kind of gave credence for what they were saying.
To draw a parallel to us disaffected white people in our countries, what the blatant anti-whiteism, the blatant demographic change, the blatancy with which this is being done to us, the anti-whiteism is carried out on us, is creating more of us, the same as it created more of them with the war on terror.
No, exactly.
Yeah, and that's something that has always bothered me a bit, Yizz. And the more that, you know, that, I mean, especially like with BLM in the US and a bit in Britain as well, I saw that people were, you know, getting red pilled, if you call it that. But at the same token, I was thinking, you know, they're allowed. There is an element of rage baiting. A lot of these media companies were sort of wanting people to get angry, to get, and if you people are being led down the garden path to be red pilled, you know, you have to ask yourself, well, why is that? And that's always something that's never sat right with me. A lot of these sorts of, you know, these mass people converting to being like so-called red pilled on these sorts of subjects. And so this is why I've always been. I know there's like slop or low-hanging fruit issues, but it is it is something that I am concerned with, because it's like a way that the regime can sort of squeeze in the win, which
Well, yeah.
you know,
I mean,
squeeze.
keep in mind, like I said about needing a Hitler, the media, and there always needs to be the out-group to punish and the danger to point to. And the more that they can stir the pot, the more Richard Spencers they get, the more blood tribe neo-Nazi idiots they get to take the streets and wave their stupid swastika flags, the more ammunition they have to use against us for this war on white people. And so that's why for the longest time I've encouraged people not to fall into this media trap. They want you to call yourself a racist. They want you to wave your Nazi flag and to go out and say, I hate this and I hate that, and we need to gas the you-know-who and all this shit. They want people to do that so they can put it in the media and continue what they're doing. Like, the best way to fight this is to withdraw from that, to deny the enemy what they want, and to build positive, loving cultural things, music, families, communities, positive churches, and to actively fight this by generating what it is they're trying to destroy, which is white positive, pro-white, pro-family, pro-truth communities that want to build a better West and build a better West man. That is what they are trying to get rid of. So the more you contribute to that, that is the more you fight this war correctly. But if you just become an agitated hater that wants to counter-agitate, then you are being a stooge of the regime.
Absolutely.
Mostly planned their own operations and looked to bin Laden for funding and assistance. He was not their commander. There is also no evidence that bin Laden used the term Al-Qaeda to refer to the name of a group until after September the 11th, when he realized that this was the term the Americans had given him. In reality, Jamal al-Fadl was on the run from bin Laden, having stolen money from him. In return for his evidence, the Americans gave him witness protection in America and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Many lawyers at the trial believed that al-Fadl exaggerated and lied to give the Americans the picture of a terrorist organization that they needed to prosecute bin Laden. What did exist was a powerful idea that was about to inspire a single, devastating act that would lead the whole world into believing the myth that had begun to be constructed in the Manhattan courtroom.
What's this other jet doing? What's this other jet doing? Holy fuck!
Oh my god! Oh my god!
Pause it.
Jesus fucking Christ!
And you're telling me that the guy's passport made it out of that?
No.
I don't buy it. I don't buy it. Sorry. I don't believe it.
Yeah, fucking titanium passport.
Hey now,
Yeah, I mean-
jet fuel can melt steel beams now. Sorry, go ahead.
But it's just, how convenient. Oh, this terrorist, quote unquote, that we want to arrest. Oh, he's not done any crimes. Oh wait, he's just blown up the World Trade Center. Yay,
Yeah.
we can go after him now.
Don't touch it.
Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh no!
Oh my god!
The attack on America by 19 hijackers shocked the world. It was Ayman Zawahiri's new strategy, implemented in a brutal and spectacular way. But neither he nor bin Laden were the originators of what was called the Plains Operation. It was the brainchild of an Islamist militant called Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who came to bin Laden for funding and help in finding volunteers. But in the wake of the panic created by the attacks, the politicians reached for the model which had been created by the trial earlier that year. The hijackers were just the tip of a vast international terrorist network, which was called Al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda is to terror what the mafia is to crime. There are thousands of these terrorists in more than 60 countries. They are recruited from their own nations and neighborhoods and brought to camps in places like Afghanistan, where they are trained in the tactics of terror.
This one network, Al-Qaeda, that's receiving so much discussion and publicity, may have activities in 50 to 60 countries, including the United States.
Our war is against networks and groups, people who coddle them, people who try to hide them, people who fund them. This is our calling.
And the attacks had another dramatic effect. They brought the neoconservatives back to power in America. When George Bush first became president, he had appointed neoconservatives like Paul Wolfowitz and their allies like Donald Rumsfeld to his administration. But their grand vision of America's role in the world was largely ignored by this new regime.
I just don't think it's the role of the United States to walk into a country and say, we do it this way, so should you. We're going to...
Amazing.
Yep. Now, Adam Curtis videos are awesome. They are Kino, as the people say.
Yeah. It's just...
One thing that I was going to sorry, Hitman, carry on.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say again, because Wolfowitz and people like that were, I believe, were acolytes of Leo Strauss. Like this is back in the 60s, and one thing interesting about Leo Strauss is he encouraged, because he was, I think he was a professor in Chicago, if I remember correctly.
He was, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Chicago, and there's this sort of neocon crowd, and he was sort of raising these neocons to be the new elite coming through, and he was fascinated by two TV shows in particular, one of which was called Gunsmoke, where you had this American, this American, there was a Western, so you have like this American hero and this direct sort of good and evil. The fact that there's always this constant good and evil, and we're always on the side of the good, right? You know, there's that old joke. It's a good thing in history. This good side always wins all the time, right?
Yeah, it's like Norm Macdonald said. You know, I looked at a history book, and it seems like the good guys always win. Isn't that something?
Yeah. Yeah, and then there was another one called is it Mason Perry or something like that? It was like a courtroom drama. And
Perry Mason, yeah.
Perry Mason, sorry, that's it, Perry Mason. And in that, you have this character who presents himself as this upstanding, moral authority voice that is able to guide those in the courtroom as this true American figure. But at the same time, because it's an act, he doesn't necessarily, you don't know whether if he actually believes it or not. And there's a point, I've watched a few episodes where he does like sort of moments where you think, you can tell it's just an act. And this was something that in the Curtis documentary they bring up, and Leo Strauss basically says you have all these sorts of things, and you don't need to believe in them. And this is one thing that the reality is they probably don't believe in them. But the thing though is, if you sort of will it into existence, you can make it a good or bad thing. So in many ways, it is quite. I mean, they're just as ideologically fanatical as the Islamists in some way. YouTube, I'll specify, of course, I don't believe that. I'm just stating what others have sort of come to the conclusion as. But yes.
No, thank you. Let's carry on.
Find those who those evildoers.
But now the neoconservatives became all-powerful, because this terror network proved that what they had been predicting throughout the 1990s was correct. That America was at risk from terrifying new forces in a hostile world. A small group formed that began to shape America's response to the attacks. At its heart were Donald Rumsfeld and Paul Wolfowitz, along with the Vice President, Dick Cheney. and Richard Pearl, who was a senior advisor to the Pentagon. The last time these men had been in power together was 20 years before, under President Reagan. Back then, they had taken on, and as they saw it, defeated a source of evil that wanted to take over America, the Soviet Union. And now, they saw this new war on terror in the same epic terms.
The struggle against Soviet totalitarianism was a struggle between fundamental value questions. Good and evil is about as effective a shorthand as I can imagine in this regard. And there's something rather similar going on in the war on terror. It isn't a war on terror, it's a war on terrorists who wanted to impose an intolerant tyranny on all mankind, an Islamic universe in which we are all compelled.
You want to impose an intolerant tyranny on all of mankind.
It is fascinating, though, that he views it as this universal terrorism. It's not like specific. We don't get onto the specifics of it, like who the people are, the group, even down to the background of the group. It's a very specific thing. And again, it's funny because when you look at films or video games or something of the era, where you have this like generic terrorist group doing X, oppressing people, and then the main protagonist or the player character or something comes in to liberate or anything, you see that same sort of vague universal. It's the universal terrorist. It's interesting that he refers to it in that way.
That's certainly.
To accept their beliefs and live by their lights. And in that sense, this is a battle between good and evil.
I mean, I agree with him on that.
And so the Americans.
Yeah, it's battle between good and evil, but they're not the right moral frame as they think they are.
Right.
Set off to invade Afghanistan to find and destroy the heart of this network. To do this, the Americans allied themselves with a group called the Northern Alliance. They were a loose collection of warlords fighting a war of resistance against the Taliban, the Islamists who controlled Afghanistan. The Taliban's best troops were the thousands of foreign fighters from the training camps, who the Northern Alliance hated.
Pakistan! Hitman. Sorry, Hitman.
Yeah.
Just be careful because YouTube gets a bit funny with
Yeah, I just thought of that. Like you have to be careful.
Dead bodies.
YouTube doesn't care if the BBC or Fox News shows that stuff, but if regular people show that stuff, you can get struck for that.
Okay. Well, I've just moved it on. So
okay.
Yeah.
But the majority of these fighters had never had anything to do with bin Laden or international terrorism. Both they and the Taliban were radical nationalists who wanted to create Islamist societies in their own countries. But now they were either killed or taken off to Guantanamo Bay. And Islamism, as an organized movement for changing the Muslim... Remember, the Northern Alliance told the Americans that bin Laden was hiding in the mountains of Tora Bora. They were convinced they had found the heart of his organization.
The search for Osama bin Laden, there was constant discussion about him hiding out in caves, and I think many times the American people have a perception that it's a little hole dug out of a side of a mountain.
Oh, no.
This is it. This is a fortress. Yes. A complex, multi-tiered, bedrooms and all.
Whoops.
More fiction. More fiction.
Do you expect... I was just going to say, I just can imagine, like, Bond tied to the slab with the laser coming down. See,
look, this reminds... My mind is always in memes. This is if you scroll down, you see the hiding place of Saddam Hussein.
Yes.
Actually, I think I've seen this map in Medal of Honor somewhere. That,
all I have to say is 007, your mission is to infiltrate the terrorist hideouts and to eliminate the dictator.
It's like a base from Evil Genius. You ever play that game?
Oh, yeah.
That's a great game.
Actually, I'm getting no joke. I'm actually getting some Metal Gear flashbacks with like some of those boxes at the bottom there.
Yeah.
Maybe they commissioned Hideo Kojima to design this.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be so cool. Okay, so sorry, like, carry on.
Systems and telephone systems.
Yeah.
It's a very sophisticated operation.
Oh, you bet. This is serious business. And there's not one of those. There are many of those.
For days, the Americans bombed the mountains at Tora Bora with the most powerful weapons they had. The Northern Alliance had been paid more than $1 million for their help and information. And now their fighters set off up the mountains to storm bin Laden's fortress and bring back the al-Qaeda terrorists and their leader. But all they found were a few small caves, which were either empty or had been used to store ammunition.
Imagine that. Imagine that. They didn't find what the media said existed once again. Imagine my shock.
I tell you what, rest in peace, the random Hindu Kush goat herder on top of the mountain there.
Yeah, who had his whole
blind.
livelihood and family blown to kibble. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, goodness me, that must have been one heck of a weekend.
It's like, oh, what a beautiful morning. I'm going to tend to my goats and I'm going to go say hello to my wife. Oh, what is that in the sky? And then boom, and that was the end of him. And people wonder why these people hate us fervently. Gee, I wonder.
I would say a bit of a missed opportunity of Curtis here. He could have said, and then the fighters went off to storm the Al-Qaeda stronghold, but this was a fantasy.
Oh man, that would, yeah, exactly.
There was no underground bunker system, no secret tunnels. The fortress didn't exist. The Northern Alliance did produce some prisoners they claimed were al-Qaeda fighters, but there was no proof of this. And one rumour was that the Northern Alliance was simply kidnapping anyone who looked remotely like an Arab and selling them to the Americans for yet more money.
Imagine that.
Oh, we found some random Arabs in Pakistan.
Yeah. Or, like as I mentioned, like random goat herder. If he survived the bombing and his family, they get off the mountain and then they just get picked up by, like these American-backed tribals from a. I mean, again, one thing you can't discount here is that because it's all tribal, they probably just kidnapped like rival men from rival tribes to present to the Americans.
It's like, oh, hey, like we don't like this clan of people, or we don't like the guys that live over in this piece of the hills. We're just going to go beat up some of them and put them in handcuffs and sell them to the Americans and say they were terrorists. Like you know that happened. You know it did.
Yeah, well, I was funny enough, yes, because I was speaking to I was speaking to a few years ago a British veteran from Afghanistan, and he was saying that in Helmand, for example, where the British were predominant there. You when they first arrived, you had the so-called tribe that was on the western side saying, oh yeah, these other people from tribes are Taliban, so we go over there, bomb, shoot, and they weren't. There's no evidence, but then that pissed off that tribe, and then they would say, oh no, this tribe, and then after a while, the British and the Western forces were being used by rival power factions to take out each other's rivals, basically, until everyone was sort of pissed off with the British, because we end up just at the end of it, you go after everybody, and that was it was used because they're not stupid.
Yeah.
The Americans now began to search all the caves in all the mountains of eastern Afghanistan for the hidden al-Qaeda network.
We found a cave. The rest of it is open, break.
If nobody went up to look into that cave, people could have been hiding up there for days and watching everything that we did.
But wherever they looked, there was nothing there. Al-Qaeda seemed to have completely disappeared. But then, the British arrived to help. They were convinced they could hunt down Al-Qaeda because of what they said was their unique experience in fighting terrorism in Northern Ireland. They could succeed where others had failed.
The hunt for Al-Qaeda and Taliban goes on. And we stand shoulder to shoulder with the United States and our other coalition allies in the global war of terrorism.
Here we go.
How many Al-Qaeda have you captured?
We haven't captured any Al-Qaeda, but...
And how many have you actually managed to kill here in southeast Afghanistan?
We haven't killed any.
Amazing.
Oh, I feel sorry for this chap because I mean, yeah, he was probably really hoping he would, and yeah.
Yeah, a man with a mustache like that deserves better.
It's shocking. It's shocking. I mean, probably all they. I do have to wonder, like with the caves, because if there was like large numbers of men, you know, these people, because these people, like especially like the special forces types, are trained, you know, scouts and all these sorts of things. You would have seen evidence of people up there, like tracks, for example, or
and remember,
you know, like basic positions.
To back up what you're saying, remember what the media lied to us. They said not only was there did this base exist, there were bunches of them. So you're talking about a network of people with thousands of manpower strong to dig and create these massive underground bases, which would require logistics. They would require food, water, supplies. There would be logistic networks. And if you turn up none of that in a year, wouldn't common sense just say it never existed? Because you would find traces of that. You can't make big facilities that require thousands of people to make them and supply them and leave no trace of it. Like that's a fantasy. That might happen in science fiction, but that's not reality.
I mean, I'm just watching this second clip of this officer here. He sounds a bit embarrassed. So I think men like him and others probably deep down know that this is all bullshit, and he's feeling embarrassed having to say all these things to, you know, he can't lie.
Or,
but at the same
maybe
time,
he did believe until he got there, and now he doesn't mind to speak candidly because.
Since then, probably believed before it, and then we got them and was like, and a lot of soldiers. I mean, a lot of their accounts were like when they got to Tora Bora was like, this is absolute. This is like, I mean, I think one of them even called it like a sort of a clown show, because it was. Like
I had a friend who went to Afghanistan for years during his military service, and he said it was just pathetic what he saw. He said that he saw the American military regime blowing the crap out of primitive cavemen for nothing. And it was just sad what they were doing to those people there. Just sad.
Yeah.
Well, you know, as we've seen with this documentary, they had to keep the narrative going. We've got to deal with those evil ne'er-do-wells over in those caves.
Mm-hmm.
The terrible truth was that there was nothing there because Al-Qaeda as an organization did not exist. The attacks on America had been planned by a small group that had come together around bin Laden in the late 90s. What had united them was an idea, an extreme interpretation of Islamism developed by Ayman Zawahiri. With the American invasion, that group had been destroyed, killed or scattered. What was left was the idea. And the real danger was the way this idea could inspire groups and individuals around the world who had no relationship to each other. In looking for an organization, the Americans and the British were chasing a phantom enemy and missing the real threat. The scale of this fantasy just kept growing as more and more groups realized the power it gave them. Above all, the group who had been instrumental in first spreading the idea, the neoconservatives. Because they now found they could use it to help them realize their vision, that America had a special destiny to overcome evil in the world. And this epic mission would give meaning and purpose to the American people. To do this, they were going to start with Iraq. And just as they had discovered a hidden reality of terror beneath the surface in America, they now found hidden links that previously no one had suspected between the Al-Qaeda network and Saddam Hussein.
Oh, how convenient.
Yeah.
I mean, this was like the ultimate like bullshit like one going. But if you know anything about the Saddam regime, but yeah, let's continue this cockamamie story. Let's.
Evidence from intelligence sources, secret communications, and statements by people now in custody reveal that Saddam Hussein aids and protects terrorists, including members of Al-Qaeda. Imagine those 19 hijackers with other weapons and other plans, this time armed by Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, you have to imagine it because it doesn't exist. We can't show it to you. You have to imagine it, like all this other crap we've told you.
Is it sort of when you go to bed at night, a nightmare will struck you. You don't want that, do you?
Exactly. Like I said, all these people do is fearmonger and push an agenda for control. These are evil, evil people.
No, we're about to hear from one of them again.
There are no links. It simply isn't true. What hasn't been established is a direct link between Saddam's intelligence and the 9/11 plotters, although even there is evidence that suggests very possibly facilitation and assistance to the 9/11 hijackers.
There really is evidence?
There really is evidence.
So when people say there is no association between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein, they're wrong?
They're flatly wrong.
Really?
Absolutely wrong.
Okay, stand by. Okay.
The driving force behind these new global policies in the war on terror was the power of a dark fantasy. A sinister web of hidden and interlinked threats that stretched around the world. And such was the power of that fantasy that it also began to transform the very nature of politics. Because increasingly, politicians were discovering that their ability to imagine the future and the terrible dangers it held gave them a new and heroic role in the world. In the post-war years, politicians had also used their imaginations, but to project optimistic visions of a better future that they could create for their people. And it was these visions that gave them power and authority.
This is a very brave new world, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Instead of conditioning, wonderful fantasies and dreams, we're now going to fantasize a hell on earth for you so we can keep you under control.
You will have terrible nightmares and you will like it.
But those dreams collapsed, and politicians like Tony Blair became more like managers of public life, their policies determined often by focus groups. But now, the war on terror allowed politicians like Blair to portray a new grand vision of the future. But this vision was a dark one of imagined threats, and a new force began to drive politics: the fear of an imagined future.
Not a conventional fear about a conventional threat.
Oh, I hate this man.
But the fear...
What's the word? Press S to spit?
S to spit.
I say, Hitman, I'm sorry I'm going to bring pop culture back into this, but this was all of the time of like Revenge of the Sith, right? And I refuse to believe that when George Lucas was writing, Palpatine in the prequels, he didn't have someone like Blair, or people say like Bush. They compare him to Bush or Nixon or something. I don't.
No, Palpatine's way more like Blair.
Yeah, I think the Nixon and Bush comparison is just liberal cope. I think it's Blair.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like when you look at him, it's Blair.
Yeah. Even in the words that Palpatine spoke, his rhetoric and stances on things way more like Blair.
Yeah, and it's the same sort of time. It's like there's in many ways that was how Palpatine was presented in the films, as using these imaginary crises to boost and change narratives and like
Yeah.
You know, suddenly, oh, we're the Republic. Actually, no, now we're the Empire. So, yay.
Well, the thing is that you know, okay, this might be a bit of a trope, but Bush kind of is a moron. There's like no brains in his head. All of the crap he pushed was all just other people like filling his brain, whereas Blair is an actual like evil genius.
Yeah, I think Blair is more of a strong-willed actor than Bush. The Bush Jr., old GW, he was a regime stooge. Blair here is a regime player. There's a big difference.
Yeah, and he was able to hearken back and get across to many different groups across society, something that Keir Starmer can't do today, and that's why there's a lot of problems in the UK today, because he hasn't got that capability and he's not that will to do it. I mean, one of the things that at the time Blair was asked about his religion, and he, after office, he converted to Roman Catholicism. Before it, he was nominally, I guess, Church of England, that was sort of the general view of it. And he talked about his faith, and he talked about Iraq in this, and he referred to it as this invasion. He actually referred to it as a crusade. In his mind, it was like a crusade.
He's tapping into the I think the latent patriotic sentiment amongst most British people, I think. So
yeah,
indeed.
That one day, these new threats of weapons of mass destruction, rogue states and international terrorism combine to deliver a catastrophe to our world. And then the shame of knowing that I saw that threat day after day and did nothing to stop it.
It may not erupt and engulf us this month or next, perhaps not even this year or next.
I just think these dangers are there. I think that it's difficult sometimes for people to see how they all come together. I think it's my duty to tell it to you if I really believe it. And I do really believe it. I may be wrong in believing it, but I do believe it.
So you're a fanatic, Blair, then, ultimately.
I think he's just a Machiavellian. And I think, like many psychopaths, he has no issue at all telling big lies to 1 million people in front of a camera. Like, it's no different for him than me and you know, asking a clerk how much for this pound of fish or whatever. Like, to him, telling big manipulative lies is so comfortable and so easy for him that he really does believe the things he says because he knows he needs to believe them at the time to make them land correctly. Like, Blair is a good example of a powerful, intelligent, functional psychopath.
Ultimately, to him, it's just like, oh, I'm just conveying a story, a narrative.
Yeah.
I mean, in many ways, he sort of like presents himself as this fixer, this regime fixer. That, look, this is what we have in front of us. And now we need to figure out how we can implement this that works out for everybody, or that's sort of how his sort of mind goes. And whenever he was confronted, like on Question Time or Newsnight, or even like with the panel audience, you've always had like the odd one or two, even like Richard Tice, who took him on in that setting. He doesn't do like the usual thing of trying to appeal to them or be the friend of every man. He will stick to his guns, in the sense that he will double down on what he's saying, and basically say, like the technique of like saying, I may be wrong, but I believe this is the right thing to do, that sort of stuff. And it's something you don't see with politicians in the UK today.
Indeed.
Well, I believe you need to leave us now, Yizz, don't you?
Yes. I thought I would have more time, but my cousin's coming over, and he's bringing his new girlfriend and some barbecue, and I'd like to hang out with them, and he'll be here any minute now. So I am going to have to depart. But I had a wonderful time again, and thank you for inviting me back. And I apologize if I spoke a little too boldly about things that might be disliked by your government or something. But I do enjoy these streams, and thank you for having me on again. And I look forward to doing this again with you one time. Doing this again with you in the future.
No, certainly. Well, thank you for coming on, Yizz, and be well.
Thank you very much. We'll be in touch. And oh, you're welcome, AI. And both of you, of course, are welcome to message me and come on my Monday night stream and hang out with me and talk about the news whenever. And again, thank you to everybody who's listening and helping Hitman grow. He makes excellent content, and I'm glad to be a part of it. So give him a like, give him a share, invite your friends to come watch his streams, because he clearly makes quality content, or I wouldn't be here.
Well, thank you so much, Yizz.
All right. Well, good night, everybody. I'll see you soon. Take care.
Take care.
Good night.
Right.
What Blair argued was that faced by the new threat of a global terror network, the politician's role was now to look into the future and imagine the worst that might happen, and then act ahead of time to prevent it. In doing this, Blair was embracing an idea that had actually been developed by the Green Movement. It was called the precautionary principle. Back in the 1980s, thinkers within the ecology movement believed the world was being threatened by global warming. But at the time, there was little scientific evidence to prove this. So they put forward the radical idea that governments had a higher duty. They couldn't wait for the evidence, because by then it would be too late. They had to act imaginatively, on intuition, in order to save the world from a looming catastrophe.
It requires imagining what the worst might be and applying that imagination upon the worst evidence that currently exists.
Would Al-Qaeda buy weapons of mass destruction if it could? Certainly. Does it have the financial resources? Probably. Would it use such weapons? Definitely.
And it was this principle that now began to shape government policy in the war on terror. In both America and Britain, individuals were detained in high-security prisons, not for any crimes they had committed, but because the politicians believed, or imagined, that they might commit an atrocity in the future, even though there was no evidence they intended to do this. The American Attorney General explained this shift to what he called the paradigm of prevention.
We had to make a shift in the way we thought about things. So being reactive, waiting for a crime to be committed, or waiting for there to be evidence of the commission of a crime didn't seem to us to be an appropriate way to protect the American people.
The supporters of the precautionary principle argue that this loss of rights is the price that society has to pay when faced by the unique and terrifying threat of the Al-Qaeda network. But as this series has shown, the idea of a hidden, organised web of terror is largely a fantasy. And by embracing the precautionary principle, the politicians have become trapped in a vicious circle. They imagine the worst about an organisation that doesn't even exist. But no one questions this, because the very basis of the precautionary principle is to imagine the worst without supporting evidence. And instead, those with the darkest imaginations become the most influential.
It's sort of interesting, isn't it? All the stuff that we're just seeing, and this idea of like preventative crimes. It's almost like what they've done with the people who rioted over the summer here. It's like, well, these people have done the wrong thing. We need to arrest them because they might commit more crimes in future, despite releasing like literal murderers and rapists out onto the streets.
Yeah, I mean, it's total government policy. We've seen it with COVID. You know, you had this, the hysteria that people referred to. It was like preventative. It's like, we can't wait for the evidence of what's coming out of Italy or places where you had all these coffins and everything, which turned out to be fake footage from a film, or TV show. And then you look at BLM, all this sort of reaction to that, and it's like, we can't wait for the evidence. It's all white people are bad, and so this tactic is used definitely, and as you said, with the riots and everything, it's these people. I mean, you had some accounts who were referring to them as trying to instigate a revolution and overthrow the government or something, which is, I mean, it's ridiculous in itself. It's like the same people who would say that the Jan 6 people went there, and could have overthrown the US government, the most powerful government in the world, unlimited resources of military equipment. They just walk into the capital and that's it. It's like a game of Hearts of Iron. They've taken control of the taking control of the country. You know, yeah. I mean,
so the gaslight focus has been completed.
Yes. Yeah.
But now there are growing questions about the British government's precautionary measures and about whether the threat is really as great as they claim. In December last year, the Law Lords ruled by a majority of 8-1 that the government's detention of foreign nationals without trial was illegal under the European Convention on Human Rights.
Pause it a sec.
Oh yeah, buddy Hugh Edwards. So
first of all, fucking nonce. Second of all, this was the Law Lords, which was the old for people to sort of understand Hitman here. Before the Supreme Court in the UK, you had the Law Lords, which would decide such high judgments of law in the UK. And I would think, what was this documentary? 2004, 2005, is it? Yeah, 2004. So only a couple years later, the Law Lords were done away with, and you had the creation of Supreme Court, which, I mean, I would say it's a pretty obvious. You get rid of one node of power which isn't in your camp, and then you replace it with a new system which is, it's filled with your lackeys, with your, like that spider, that creepy old hag with the spider brooch and other gremlin-looking barristers and everything, just real spiteful mutant boomers. I mean, awful people. So yeah, the thing was, Blair did have pushback, but he when he did, he just would crush it. And this is why the New Labour went after, say, the hereditary peers, and even to the day, they're sort of, I mean, the last vestiges of hereditary peers have been removed from the Lords. So yeah,
with the New Labour strategy, just create a load of new cancerous institutions that sort of suck the life out of the existing ones.
Wait, I mean, the funny thing is, on a tactical level, like if we were to, like, our group side to in power, that's one suggestion I would, I was asked by someone in Reform, like, how would you, by a local activist, like, how, because I said, okay, if you were to get in government, how would you implement policies which, the Whitehall civil service and the wider establishment would, like, stop you. We've seen what happened with Liz Truss and other people who tried, maybe even tried to implement policies which were, against regime approved. How would you be able to do it? And they said they weren't sure. And I said in response, well, as a way, one of the things I would do, and this was clearly inspired by Blair and his tactics in his memoirs, I would create, like, rival departments which over time would slowly absorb those enemy or rival castles, and do it sort of that way. But that would be just like managerialism on managerialism. But the thing is, you do need elements of managerialism in a sort of functioning system, though. You just can't have them running the show, because they're evil and they're prone for evil deeds.
Well, another strategy is you could do the Javier Milei tactics. You just, like, destroy government departments that you think are subversive. So Ofcom, afuera.
Yeah.
Afuera.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other. Yeah, I think the weaker departments, you could do that. It's like, there are some departments in this country you could definitely do that too. Yes.
Perhaps a bit of both, of yours and my idea.
Yeah.
His rule that foreign terrorist suspects cannot be locked up without trial in British jails.
And one Law Lord, Lord Hoffman, went further. He publicly challenged the very basis of the government's war on terror, that radical Islamism was a threat to the life of the nation. I do not underestimate, Lord Hoffman said, the ability of fanatical groups of terrorists to kill and destroy, but they do not threaten the life of the nation. Whether we would survive Hitler hung in the balance, but there is no doubt we shall survive Al-Qaeda. The Spanish people have not said that what happened in Madrid, hideous crime as it was,
Society that believes in nothing, fear becomes the only agenda. Whilst the 20th century was dominated between a conflict between a free market right and a socialist left, even though both of those outlooks had their limitations and their problems, at least they believed in something. Whereas what we are seeing now is a society that believes in nothing. And a society that believes in nothing is particularly frightened by people who believe in anything. And therefore, we label those people as fundamentalists or fanatics, and they have much greater purchase in terms of the fear that they instill in society than they truly deserve. But that's a measure of how much we have become isolated and atomized, rather than of their inherent strength.
What an absolutely amazing statement.
Yeah, I was going to say that's an amazing analysis, and yeah, I mean, what he said 100%, because you see that now with figures that talk about Britain in a way where it's more than just an economic zone, or more, it actually has like meaning and purpose. And then you have commentators like some fuckwit on LBC that will say that's a very radical fundamentalist statement that you're making there, and it shows why, because effectively they want people to be smug nihilists that believe in nothing, that everything is universal, everything is has no value. What is an English person? What is an English? I don't know what an English person is. Oh, I'm a fucking retard. I only was born yesterday. It's
No, they play the hatching, don't they?
yeah.
Yeah, so that was the end of the Klepsad and the Power of Nightmares. But that's really interesting that it also explains about why the regime doesn't like people like us, because we believe in something and therefore we're dangerous.
Yeah. Well, because people are driven by, I mean, this is another Kurt's phrase, but people are driven by emotion. They're not driven by logic. And in some ways, going to the, say, the Brexit referendum, a lot of it, a lot of Remainers will say, well, it was driven by emotion. And it was, because a lot of the content by the Leave side, the Dominic Cummings side, was drawn on maybe petty bulldog nationalism, but it was something that was emotional in the sense that it can resonate with the public. But then you had like the Remain side, where it was all graphs and stats, and there was nothing of any value beyond that. It was kind of like a PowerPoint presentation in like when you go in for like a office like meeting or something, and you have like the PowerPoint presentation. And that's something, and I never really understood why afterwards, when the Leave side won, quote unquote won, why so many people on the Reform side, managerial types like that Professor Grayling or whatever he's called, why they were filled with such resentment. And I actually think there is an element of jealousy, that there are people out there who can have passionate views about something, and that they are slaves to modernity, where they know they can't have those sorts of passions, because it otherwise means that they then have to be committed to something, and they're only committed to economic market forces.
No, certainly they just want everything to be just shut up and enjoy your Goislop, and don't try to think about anything too hard.
Enjoy the lesbian midget dwarf on your latest like EastEnders episodes. Just enjoy it. It's inclusive.
No, absolutely. Yeah, so we've been going for nearly 2.5 hours, and it's getting pretty late. So I think it's about time we wrapped up. So thank you everybody for watching, and I hope you found this episode enjoyable. Is there anything you would like to share before we leave, AI?
Not at the moment. I will hopefully continue with the Richard Hilton book. I may be taking a bit of a break from YouTube in the future. I got something planned in the works. I can't talk about it yet, but it's going to, hopefully it will be significant for the country. I was going to say, turn on the 10 o'clock news and you'll, and I'm joking, I'm joking. I'm joking, YouTube. Now I've got something planned in the works that will take up a bit of my time, and I may not be doing as much YouTubing on other things, but I'll try and do like shows like this and catch up. But I want to get the Richard Hilton book finished, and then I can have my time. But when I'm able to divulge what this thing is, I'll let everyone know, and it'd be it's a really interesting project, and I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Well, wonderful. We'll have to stay tuned for that. And big O's. And lesbian midget dwarf scolding a stupid, ignorant white man, no less.
Yeah.
Or about a whole brigade of them. Ugh.
Oh, that'd be funny. I might watch it actually. Just
oh no, no! Please don't feed it. Don't give it energy.
I know. Yeah. I mean, I'd only some sort of. If it was like, this is the thing. If it was like sadistic in the sense of them being punished, I'd sort of watch it. I have to see, I'm channeling my inner Caligula at the moment. I'm delving into madness, Hitman, and I'm sort of enjoying the madness of everything.
Oh really? Oh
yes.
Yeah, so if Alan's trying to, please put his link in the chat if it's not in the description. Oh, sorry, I should probably do that. Yeah, I'll put your Twitter, but yeah, I'll get that added.
I was going to say, if people on YouTube, if you type in AI Shire Tory, or come up with my channel, it'll probably come up with my most viewed stream, which is the Politics of Skyrim with Apostolic Majesty. That's probably the most viewed. That's like what, 5,000-6,000 views at the moment. So that's my most viewed, and it's frustrating because it's the one thing. I mean, you do all this research into important topics, and then you do a bloody stream on Skyrim or Fallout or something, and then it gets like thousands of views, and it's.
Well, I also think it's because AM was on it. He's quite popular.
Yeah, AM as well. But the Fallout one I did, that got like a couple thousand, and yeah, it's just. I mean, it's good. It's good. Don't get me wrong. I had a fun time, but it's like. I wish it wasn't so popular, Yeah.
Well, I'll put your link in the description for your channel, and congrats on 1K subs, by the way. Well, thank you very much, Ardent Party.
No,
okay.
no. Thank you. Yes. I hope you enjoy it, Ardent Parody, as well.
Well, in terms of this channel, obviously next week will be episode 4. I've not decided on a topic yet, but stay tuned, and I'll announce it closer to the time. So thank you everybody for watching, and good night.
Good night.